Out of the transactions of the Scottish Rite Research Society's main publication, Heredom, for Volume 6, 1997, edited by S. Brent Morris. He's a 33rd degree Scottish Mason. William L. Fox, another 33rd degree Scottish Mason, wrote a very good article, an architectural sketch of a book, Lodge of the Double-Headed Eagle. He explains some ideas on his approach to history. Now, I majored in history. I have my bachelor's degree in history. And I thought his analysis of history here was really very interesting. Starting on page 40, he says, in Lodge we learn about buildings and design, symmetry and balance. We hear various names invoked in Lodge like Solomon, Hiram Abiff, Pythagoras. He says, the most intriguing name for me is John. It's interesting, isn't it? John the Gospel writer echoes the first words of Genesis in his incomparable prologue. In the beginning was the Word. Ein arche ein ho logos is how the Greek says it. The actual term in Greek is logos, and it is very abstract, and therefore it's a slippery word. The concept of logos is hard to translate. It's even harder to comprehend. Goethe's Faust, if you'll recall reading that, he tried at least 15 different ways to translate logos, and he just couldn't do it. He really had a struggle because there's so many various meanings of the word. But one of the best equivalents of John's original meaning is the idea of a plan. In the beginning was a plan. In this sense, John is thinking like an architect. Isn't that kind of fun on John 1 and 1? I love that Masonic touch. That's cool. So anyway, the plan of this book that he's talking about, he says this: I never held any illusions that this book would be or ever was going to be definitive or completely encyclopedic or totally comprehensive. No history book can be. And this is an interesting issue to keep in mind here. It is a selective treatment of a subject too large to be held in one book. And that's so true. I looked at many thousands of primary source documents. I read countless pages of countless books. Because of this field work, I support and bear witness to the advice of George F. Kennan when he says the historian has no choice but to simplify, to generalize, and to ask the reader to lean on his judgment. There's just too much. You have to leave out more than you include. Every history book does that. You cannot write a history book of the world and include it all. I mean, some of them can get, magnum opus, 2,500, 3,000 pages, but that hardly covers anything. That's why you stay away from the survey courses. They're worthless. But that's my words. But anyway, he says, and I hasten to add that the historian begs the reader to forgive him when he is wrong, which is probably most of the time, unfortunately. Page 41, he says, T.S. Eliot offers wisdom to the scholar. I love this of T.S. Eliot. History has many cunning passages, contrived corridors and issues, deceives with whispering ambitions, guides us by vanities. Even working in the nearby 20th century, I never got to the bottom of several mysteries. For lack of reliable tracings, just not enough information on some things, on all topics. I tried to keep a distinction in this work between a fact and an event. It is the event, rather than the isolated fact, which is the proper concern of history. And this makes sense. Listen to how he explains this. The fact that Grand Commander John Henry Cowles liked to wear very wild, custom-ordered, bright silk pajamas had no bearing on what he did to shape events in his life or in the fraternity. Details should only illuminate, not dominate. Mere information is not a substitute for explanation. Oh, I really like that. That's very interesting. The historian work suggests, according to Russell Kirk on John Lucas, the historian's work suggests his disgust with our time, the monstrosity of government, the importance of powers, the separation of races, the conformity of nations, the purposelessness of society, the fiction of prosperity, the disillusion of learning, the meaningless of letters, the sensualness of the arts, the destruction of nature, the decay of science, the faithlessness of religion, the mutation of morality. That's quite a list, isn't it? This fairly describes the historian on a day when he's feeling optimistic, he says. Wow. One must also be willing to shed at a moment's notice one's preconceived notions. And this is so difficult to do. But that's the essence of being a good historian, especially within Freemasonry. There's a lot of information in our craft that is absolute bunk. I'm learning about a lot of it, and that's why I like doing these videos. History has much unpredictability. As Marx predicted, the future is certain. It's the past that we don't know much about. One must be willing to let surprises happen. I admit that I was prepared not to like Albert Pike. He said his picture of him with his long scruffy beard and all that turned me completely off. And then he started reading the man. And he said, whoa, I had to get rid of my prejudice of deciding not to like him before I ever read him or studied him. How many of us need to do that? Not just with Albert Pike either, you know. He was an extraordinary man. I also discovered that James A. Richardson was a much underrated Grand Commander. If the Scottish Rite largely followed Pike's agenda in its 20th century development, it was Richardson who gave it the means to do so. I try to live by Proust's belief that exceptions to the rule are the magic of existence. Oh, I love that. Is that cool? Exceptions to the rule, magic of existence, yeah. History matters to everyone. Let's get that straight. It's up to the historian to give that premise some teeth, give it some meaning, his greatest respect. If he neglects this principle, then he thinks if matters only matter to him and other historians, he is making a woefully huge mistake. So anyway, history is for me a spiritual discipline in which a people is taking account of its past. More than a century ago, Droyan gave voice to my self-understanding in connection with this book. He reasons, history is humanity's knowledge of itself, its certainty about itself. It is not the light and the truth. History is not the light and the truth, but it is a search for the light and the truth. It's a sermon upon the light and the truth. It is a consecration thereto. It is like John the Baptist, not the light, but sent to bear witness of the light. I thought that was a pretty interesting analysis myself. So there's a selection of heraldom from the Scottish Rite Research Society.